Intro stinger. Okay. Well, Sadek, thanks for putting me live. Assalamu alaikum. Dumelang, goeie aand. Good evening. Welcome to Salam Media. And yes, it is a Friday, the 23rd of July. A beautiful day. It was, alhamdulillah, quite cold up here in the Highveld region. Juma Mubarak to one and all, and Eid Mubarak to one and all as well, whoever we haven't spoken to as well in that regard. It is obviously Friday Night Live with me, ST. And coming up tonight on the program, a whole lot's going to be happening, inshallah. We are going to be speaking to Pierre Hefer about beekeeping, right, in the Go Wild segment. Now, in the Go Wild segment, obviously here, what we're going to be discussing is about everything about how to start the bee farming industry, and also the South African honey and bee keeping and bee industry has grown by about 20 billion, as the stats are showing, right? And also what you need to do to become a bee farmer, and if you are interested in doing this, in starting a bee farming and honeybees, all of that kind of thing. We are going to be talking to him to give us a bit more in-depth analysis on that. Thereafter, at around 7:30 or so, inshallah, I'm going to be speaking to an inventor, right? Mangiso Mabaso. Okay. Now, he's obviously chatting to me about an app called Sisanda. Now, the Sisanda app is a dedicated science lab app. You've heard me correct. A science laboratory in high school or in varsity, the apparatus and whatever the case is. So this guy has created a science lab app on your smartphone. Okay. And it's designed to make learning fun and easy, especially for science, etc. And obviously, we do know that obviously during the lockdown and the COVID situation that we are facing and all of this unrests, learners and students have had to obviously, use other platforms via Zoom and all of the other, platforms to obviously do their learning, e-learning as such. He'll be chatting to us a bit more about how to make it fun and accessible, especially to children without resources. Yes, that's the thing. Thereafter, at around 8 p.m. on Tech Talk part number 2, inshallah, I'm going to be talking to a youngster, a 19-year-old by the name of Rachwane Khalema, right, who hails from Limpopo. And he's a self-proclaimed scientist. Now, listen to this, right? He has just invented a machine to disinfect money, cash, and all of these kind of things. And he's also raising funds about his project. And we're going to be talking to him all about this at around 8 p.m. or so. Thereafter, at around 8:30, inshallah, I'm going to be speaking to Yasin Teba, no stranger to Salam Media or me as well, a good friend of mine from Vision Tactical. And we're going to be talking about the projects that they've been working on. And we're going to be having a personal chat because he obviously, I must say, a massive shout out to Yasin Teba and the team at Vision Tactical. Jazakallah khair. Allah yarda ilayk. Allah bless you guys for helping me 2 or 3 weeks ago. When I had a bit of an incident. But anyway, having said that, it's time now to head straight into the Go Well segment. We'll be back in a sec. Don't go anywhere.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Welcome back. Yes, it's time for the Go Wild segment. And yes, you are listening to something fresh, but not DJ Fresh. Anyway, I'm Safaraz Takolia. Okay, time now for the Go Wild segment. As I mentioned, we're talking about the South African honey and beeswax industry, right? And it's worth over now 20 billion rands, as what FIN24 have obviously, projected, and the actuaries have obviously said in the media reports recently, right? Now, to talk to us a bit more, I'm speaking to Beekeeper Pierre Hefer, who joins us right now on the program on Friday Night Live. Pierre Hefer, good evening. Welcome to Salam Media and Friday Night Live.
Hi, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, goeie aand. Daar sy, yes, jy het hom reg, daar sy. Awesome stuff, Mr. Pierre. Okay, now, I was looking at some of these statistics, right, about how the South African honey production could obviously see 20 billion rands turnover, right? This was a report back on Fund 24. I think it was about 2017 or so, right? Now, as at 2021, I'm not sure what the actual, stats are with regards to this, but the local honey industry is seeing an average annual turnover at that time of about 3.2 billion rands, and they were looking at producing around 2,000 tons per annum. This is according to the South African Biodiversity Institute, right? Now, however, these numbers could increase. This was about a few years ago. Now we're looking at 20 billion rands. This is a massive increase in the last 4 to 5 years. Now, where have we seen such growth in this regard? And especially, is this for recreational beekeepers, maybe, at the backyards or in the small farms? Or are we seeing this growth more on a national footprint in terms of large-scale bee harvesting and export in this regard? Maybe perhaps, because South Africa hasn't maybe had formal training schools, in this regard. I'm talking about the SA Honeybee Foundation, because obviously Dominic Marchant from there was talking about this. And then, unlike the majority of countries with like strong commercial farming output, like even Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, so where are we seeing this growth mainly right now?
Well, it's actually quite interesting because it's not a good news story. A large amount of the growth that we have is from adulterated honey. And when I say adulterated, this is honey which is being infused with other products which are not pure honey.
So they like mixing. There's like you mean they're like. Okay, so could you like just maybe elaborate a bit further for people who might not, have knowledge in this regard about adulterated honey?
So this is a big threat. When you have a look at what the amount of honey which is sold on the shelves in the shops in South Africa, you're finding that a very large portion, over 50% of that honey is adulterated, and it's not pure, and it's not.
So it's more of like a syrup-based honey. Is that what you're referring to by adulterated?
Absolutely, and so that's why we have to be so vigilant, and why the bee industry has to stand together, and that we need to do a lot of education of the public, because it, as you say, it is a incredibly lucrative industry going forward.
Correct.
And it'll become more and more so. There's no limit to how big the industry will become. But after olive oil, honey is the most adulterated product on our supermarket shelves.
Now,
So
wait.
what we
Now,
have
on
to
the
worry-
point about olive oil, you notice it's got an olive blend. They don't mention pure olive oil. They say olive blend, blended seeds, whatever. So they're also adding additives and maybe not pure olive oil to what we are actually consuming. Now, this could obviously affect people with diabetes and things like that, maybe perhaps because of the unnatural substances in this honey that we are obviously talking about. Am I correct in saying that?
That is quite correct. That's quite correct. So you have the illusion of this incredibly healthy product, which is good.
You're
for
thinking
you
you're buying 100% pure raw honey, whatever.
Absolutely, and you might be having 3/4 of it might be pure sugar water. You'd be better off having a cup of sugar, which is what we're trying to promote.
Or maybe a Coke. Okay, so you've really shocked me here, because I was looking at like some of the stats, and obviously with regards to how the SA beekeeping industry has grown, and what they were saying in the reports, that we're looking at about 20 billion. Now, it's very lucrative, but obviously it's lucrative in a sense that obviously it's adulterated, as you mentioned in the intro.
Yes.
Right, on that point now, let's say, for example, you want to start, keeping bees, and you want to start a bee farming, industry, or a small bee farm. What are some of the requirements? Let's talk about the basic understanding, right? In learning new interests, let's talk about basically how a honeybee colony is structured, and then maybe about how the honeybee works in a hive, and like, some of the fields, and what are some of the land requirements that I would need. Let's say I've got maybe my backyard. Would it be sufficient enough, or do I need a specific, like, are there some prerequisites when starting, bee farming or bee harvesting, in honeybee harvesting in this regard?
Well, I think you must make a distinction between a hobbyist, a person who wants to have a hive or two on his property,
All right.
and a small bee farmer, which is a guy who's got maybe 20 to 40 hives on his property or on a number of properties, and then a commercial bee farmer. A commercial bee farmer, normally these guys have got upwards from 1,000 hives. So
Okay.
it's a very different thinking. It's almost like saying, well, somebody makes some clothes, they make clothes for people, and are they in the fashion industry? How long is a piece of string? So you've got to be very careful about your approach. And what I suggest you do is you always start at the same point. Start by keeping a hive. Try and keep it close to where you live so that you can observe the bees, so that you can work with that hive, so that you can develop an affinity with it.
Okay.
It's the kind of industry that you have to, and especially with bees, you can learn so much from them. And they're such interesting creatures. And
they're marvelous. Yeah.
So you've got to develop this affinity with bees. And when you then understand them, and of course you have to speak to them. I don't know if you know that, but you have to speak to them.
I didn't know. Okay.
Yes.
So do I need to go and say, hey, my honeybee?
Yeah, you must go to your colony. It's an old tradition. If someone dies, or if someone moves away from the area, or one of your family members goes away, or a family member arrives, you must go and tell your bees that what's going on. So it's an important thing.
Okay. Well,
but anyway, so you start off with a single hive.
All right.
And you look after this hive for at least a year, and you'll learn what's involved. You'll learn how to take care of the bees. You'll learn about pests. You'll learn about harvesting. You'll learn about when they're dangerous, how they swarm, when they calm, how to smoke them. All the methods you'll learn. You won't.
But now this is all based on being a hobbyist, as you mentioned, right? Because there's different tiers. Then we get into obviously now bee farming, and then you get like commercial, etc., right? Correct. So basic understanding.
So your setup costs are quite low for a single hive. It's about 2,000 Rand, and you can already start the first hive. Then you'll go into 5 or 6 hives, and that also is not too expensive. And then that's the right time for you to make a call and to say, I think I'd like to do this as a living. And then you look at a commercial enterprise. Then you look at the financing, the equipment, and all that kind of stuff. And then it becomes a very different ball game.
Okay, now I was looking at something, with regards to obviously honey, right? Now, the honey industry in South Africa, as I mentioned earlier on, obviously was seeing around a turnover of 3.2 billion, but it's now risen to about 20 billion, right? Now, our national production, right? And I've seen recently that the KZN government aims to increase national production to 100,000 tons because they want to create more job employment. So this is obviously where most of the commercial bee farming and beekeeping obviously it would take place, if I'm correct in saying that, right? Yes. But beekeepers have used in the past lethal trapping methods, right? Like poison and gin traps to kill honey badgers. Who raid the beehives. So obviously these pose a threat, but these obviously, it's nature's system. These cultures.
You know what? Our threats in agriculture are much. Our threats of wildlife is not a huge big threat. You can deal with it when you have to. We have much larger threats with people vandalizing beehives and stealing beehives and trying to steal honey out of beehives. So that's a much, much bigger problem that one has to be aware of.
Now, where would we see this type of threat? Being more in like a rural area? Would you find this mainly more in your suburban areas? I mean, I've never heard of somebody, like hijacking a honey, like a beehive.
Yeah. Our suburban areas are wonderful because we plant a lot of plants. Remember, the two things that you're really interested in to keep a nice, healthy colony of bees is A, they must have food. And they must have a diversity of food. And they must have food all year round, if you can.
So pollination, obviously.
Quiet periods.
Right.
Then those quiet periods must be limited. You can't have 6 months. You can't go and put a beehive in a sunflower seed field. And they harvest while the sunflowers are out. And then the whole rest of the year, somehow they must survive without any food whatsoever.
Now, you mentioned food diversity for these marvelous creatures, right?
Yes.
What would the food diversity variants be for them? What would they thrive on mainly?
Okay, so you might find this quite surprising, but what happens with a lot of the commercial farmers is many of them move their hives around. So depending on the crops that they're harvesting from, they would move their hives to, say, blueberries, and they'll move them off the blueberries, and they'll move them to sunflowers, and they'd move them to citrus. So the hives may move around depending on which plants and which crops are then busy giving the best amount of pollen and honey.
Okay.
But if you keep bees at home, then obviously they would just eat from a variety of flowers from your garden and your neighbor's garden. It's about a 5-kilometer radius that they feed from.
Okay, so within a 5-kilometer radius is where they can go out, get their nutrients, whatever, and come back and obviously, infiltrate the colony and provide the necessary food and resources for them, right? Obviously provide sustenance for the colony, right? Yes. Now, having said that, where would be a suitable place to keep your first beehive? Because I'm talking about starting off a beehive. Where would the ideal place be to obviously place your first beehive or your first colony of bees?
So let's speak about a city environment. If you're in a city environment, you have to be very, very careful. You can't keep a beehive if you've got small dogs around, if you've got small children around. They are dangerous. So you've got to make sure that you're not introducing dangerous bees into an area where they could create a problem. Now, having said that, many people say, well, I don't have children and I don't have dogs, and I'm quite happy to keep a beehive. Then it's still a good idea to keep it quite a good distance, about 20 meters away from the buildings, and about 5 meters away from your wall. That's actually one of the city bylaws, that you can't put a beehive closer than 5 kilometers.
Now, talking about the bylaws, I just want to come in here for a sec, because I was looking at some of the beekeeping bylaws in South Africa, and there's a site that I saw called Beware. Right. Now, if you can, maybe just give us a bit more insight with regards to some of these bylaws and how this affects beekeeping in the country right now. What are some of the legislations or things like that?
So there's national legislation about beekeeping. Okay. And the national legislation is more related to transportation of bees, and you're not allowed to move them across bees, because we got two different species of bees in South Africa. A species of bees that's in the Cape, which are called capensis, and a species of bees which are north of the Karoo. And those two species don't mix very well together at all. In fact, you're not allowed to transport them over that particular line.
Now, when you talk about north of the Karoo, I mean, it's quite strange. You mentioned north of the Karoo that there would be a thriving bee environment there because it's a desert area, quite dry. I mean, I've driven to Cape Town many times on the N12.
Yes.
So they are actually quite a big, colony and lots of bee farms in that region there as well,
No,
as
not
opposed to
really.
obviously Gauteng.
No,
Okay.
not really. They aren't, not necessarily all over the area. I mean, obviously, areas which are very much more lush would attract a
Yes.
lot of bees. But it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that I mean, even if you go to small towns like you go to the R, that town has got lots of gardens and flowers and things like that in it. And you may also find that certain people are growing certain crops. I mean, the sheep farmers often would be growing herbs as well. So they may have lavender, or they may have herbs like that. So really, it's not so much about the fact that that's an important area. It's just
Mm.
a question of respecting that line. But that's the national legislation. It's not all that particular. But the legislation that determines the bylaws, every single city has got different bylaws.
Yes, because talking about the city of Johannesburg metropolitan, their public health bylaws, and I'm referring to a a provincial gazette, which was dated back in 2004. They were
Yes.
saying that a person needs a permit to obviously have, a person is the holder of a permit authorizing the activity, and every beehive must be situated, as you mentioned, 5 meters away from a boundary of the premises, etc., etc. So, do people actually need permits in terms of doing this? This is obviously based in the Johannesburg metro, but I'm sure each city and in each province would have a different bylaw, or is this a standardized bylaw?
No. Every city has got its own bylaw, but
Okay.
many of them mimic the same thing. But when you speak
Ah,
about the permits and those things, legally
yes.
you are 100% correct. But I'm sure you also realize that you need a license for your bicycle, which you have, and
Okay.
you need a dog license. You also have a dog license, I'm sure.
Correct.
You don't
Yes.
renew it every year. Practically, it doesn't happen that way.
Okay.
Practically, and the reality of it is that if you do keep bees in Johannesburg and the city objects, you just move them away. You know, it's not. I don't know anybody. Well, I know of two people who've got a permit recently. I mean, it's just crazy that the city asks us to have all these to have permits in place and things like that when they've got no personnel to administrate it and nobody to look after it. So I'm not saying you must not go with the city bylaws. Of course, you have to respect them, but most of those bylaws are made up out of worthwhile things. I mean, one of the things in the Johannesburg city bylaws is to say that you must supply your bees with water, and the water
Mm.
must be closer than 5 meters. I mean, it must be around about 5 or 10 meters away from the bees. Now, that's a really, really good idea. It's also a very good idea not to put your hive too close to a dwelling or to
Now,
your boundary fence. So I'm saying act within the city bylaws.
okay.
Um, I mean, with the exception of the permit, which is almost an impossibility, you'll take 5 years to get a beekeeping permit in Johannesburg. But
Okay.
with the exception of the permit, act within the bylaws, act responsibly, make sure that your neighbors have a buy-in. If you keep bees on your property, make sure your neighbors are comfortable with it. And I would really suggest that you form some kind of a partnership with a local beekeeper. You'll
Okay.
find the beekeepers they're very friendly chaps, and they'll help you and they'll give you advice, and you must also do a beekeeping course. You must go and learn how to work with bees and do a beekeeping course.
Right. Now, on that point about that, I see on the South African bee industry organization website, the sabio.org.za website, I'm seeing a
Yes,
wonderful picture of a blueberry and honeybee, and it says a complex pollination relationship. But
yes.
something that's very interesting that I see there is something called honey fraud and removals. I mean, there's some of these things which are quite hectic that I'm seeing here. Obviously, with regards to this. But now, having said that, right, obviously regarding honey purity and the authenticity and the fair modes of production, etc., right? When it comes to, let's say I've got a beehive and I've got a, big land or a farming area that I'm now capable of, obviously, and I'm registered and I'm a member with regards to maybe membership of the SAPIO, whatever the case may be, and I want to start supplying supermarkets, right? With regards to these type of things, yeah, right? We've in-depth we've done an in-depth analysis of, obviously, the basic understanding of how to obviously start bee farming, what are some of the beekeeping bylaws and the legislations behind it, right? And a suitable place, right, of obviously keeping the bees. Now, what I want to ask, right, with regards to that, the equipment that we might need. Let's talk about some of that. What are some of the equipment that we would need with regards to obviously starting your very first maybe beehive, etc.?
Okay, so the very basics that you require is you must have a beehive, which consists of two sections. The one is called a brood box. That's like the factory where the bees make young bees.
Okay.
The queen lays all her eggs there, and they make all the young bees. And a bee colony is between 5 and 10,000 bees, and they only live for about 4 weeks.
Wow.
So the queen has to keep them busy, to keep laying eggs continuously. It slows down over winter months, but there's a lot of work to be done in that area, and they keep that brood box very clean, very hygienic. They do temperature control and make sure it's exactly the right temperature day and night. They cool it down on a hot day, they warm it up on a cold night, and then you get a separate little section which fits on top, and that's called a super chamber. And the super chamber is the chamber in which the bees make the comb in which the honey is created.
Okay.
So
now you would obviously need protective clothing, right? I mean, your white overalls.
Yes.
I mean, I've seen them. They look like hazmats. Kind of look like the COVID suits nowadays.
Yes.
On that point.
So your personal equipment, it's actually not all that onerous. You need to have a bee suit, a proper bee suit. You need to have a couple of tools. You need a smoker. Your full range of equipment, if you buy brand new equipment, it'll probably cost you around about 2,000 rand, 2,500 rand, and you'll really have nice equipment that you can work with. And don't take shortcuts on equipment.
Okay.
The smallest little hole in your bee suit can spell.
But I have an important question. Why are all of the beehive suits and this beekeeping suits white? Look, I always have a saying, if it's not white, it's not right. I'm wearing a white jacket, right? But hey, I don't, and hey, there ain't no bees here. I know our social media colors blue and yellow, but why are they always white? Is there a specific reason?
Well, the bees are less attracted to the color white.
Oh.
So most of my bees are in urban situation in cities, and I keep hives on people's properties and I look after it there. I only work at night. So you could maybe argue, well, why would you wear a white suit if you work at night? But the bees, I mean, there is still light around you. We use a red light, and the bees aren't attracted to the red light at all. In fact, they don't see the red light. But the white colored suit is mostly related to the fact that bees are less likely. If you have two people standing next to each other, one with a colored suit, especially a black or any colored suit, and another one with a white suit, the person with a dark or the colored suit will have a lot more bees on them than the person with a white suit. So there's a particular reason for the white.
Okay, because this was quite intriguing. I mean, all these years growing up, I was wondering, okay, they're always wearing white. Like, why don't they wear like a blue overall or like a black?
Yeah.
But anyway, now, lastly, I want to ask.
Look, there are people who make the Europeans and the American bees aren't at all as aggressive as our bees. And you see the most incredibly beautiful bee suits with all kinds of bright colors and camouflage and all kinds of things. It's quite wonderful to see the way they do. But they've got very tame bees. we've got to be a lot more careful with our bees
I
because
mean, this is Africa,
yeah, this is
and
Africa.
this is South Africa. So
We've got to be on point.
yeah,
Exactly. And you can't
no,
take a chance. I mean, you see the guys working there, they don't wear gloves.
yeah.
The one, they say, oh, I'll put some vinegar on and the bees won't sting me. Don't try that with an
It's
apple.
not blue bottles. No, I know what you're saying.
No.
It's like a lifeguard. In clubs, it tells you, nah, just put a vinegar, just put the Biki Asa in there and it's going to be
Yep,
fine. Nah. Anyway,
exactly. Yeah.
Pia, lastly, before we conclude, how does
Yes.
the pollen change and the flavor of the honey? I mean, obviously, we're ushering towards now spring and also like the seasons, like since it's now winter and how it can help your bees survive now in this period as we then going to build towards obviously spring coming up in a few months.
Well, if you're speaking to urban people, we always encourage them two very important things. Please try and plant bee-friendly flowers in your garden.
Okay.
And number one, and
What
number
would
two,
some of
don't
these
use
plants
insecticides.
be?
Well, there's a huge variety. I mean, if you just research on the internet,
I've
you
seen
could
the
find a
blueberry.
list of bee-friendly flowers. But it also depends. Some flowers, like for instance, if you plant lavender, that's got flowers a large amount of the year, whereas other
Yes.
flowers may only flower for a very short period of time. But
Okay.
but it's more also very important. Don't use insecticides. Um, there's certain cities like the city of Paris about 5 or 6 years ago banned insecticides completely to ensure that there's no harm to many animals, but bees and birds being the most important. Remember, if you poison your bee, the bee will then poison a bird. So it really, really is not a good idea.
Awesome
But
stuff.
yeah, but I mean, back to your question, really
Mm.
about the flavor of honey. That is just the most fantastic thing because every season, as the season changes, every batch is different. Every batch has got different flavors. If your bees are taking honey from a wildflower or from a domestic flower or from a fruit tree or from every single honey tastes completely differently. And what happens in the city, which is wonderful, is you get this incredible blend of honeys of different flowers. So yeah, it makes a big difference. Not the
Pollination
pollen
does
so
make a
much,
big difference.
not
Yeah.
so much the pollen, it's the nectar that the
Ah,
flowers produce.
from the different variants and different varieties of
Correct. The
obviously the
pollen is
flowers.
not really something that adds flavor, and the pollen is more the protein that the bees use. But the nectar is what they store in the honey.
Well, on that sweet note, before I let you go, obviously local raw honey and people who want to get involved with this initiative, etc. You can maybe share your details and how they could obviously partake in this.
Okay, yes, with pleasure. I've got a website which is localrawhoney.co.za. But
Okay.
Sabio, as you mentioned earlier on, the South African Bee Industry Organization, is a very, very good starting point to be able to get references of beekeepers and people who can help you and who can, where you can buy your equipment and kits and that kind of stuff. And so that's a good starting point. And also from there, you'll be able to find a local beekeeping association. Like, for instance, in Gauteng, we've got the Southern's Beekeeping Association, and they're a very active association, and there's lots of people, the regular meetings, and lots of people who can help you. And it's all about that networking, Get in touch with people who are doing beekeeping. They'll help you, and they'll give you the right advice. Don't try and do
Awesome
it all
stuff.
on your own. And certainly, please don't go and watch YouTube videos and think that you can become a beekeeper from that, because most of those those YouTube videos are not South African bees. They're not South African conditions, and really they can get you into quite a lot of trouble.
Awesome stuff. Pierre Hefer, thank you so much for your time. I'm definitely going to share out, obviously, the SBA, the Southern Beekeeping Organization, as well as your platform as well, local raw honey. .co.za. We thank you for your time tonight on that sweet note. Have a wonderful, warm evening, and you take care and have an awesome one.
Thank you very
Until
much,
we
and
chat
thank you
again.
for the opportunity to be able to speak about the subject. I appreciate it
No,
very much.
it's awesome, and we're looking forward to prosperous spring. And yeah, we just hope we don't get stung. But I will remember to wear white.
Okay,
Awesome
take
stuff.
care. All the
Take care.
best.
Cheers. Eh?
Thank
Okay,
you.
Pierre.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye
Good
bye.
night.
That was obviously Pierre Hefer from local rawhoney.co.za, and we're talking about beekeeping, the basics of obviously starting a beehive and a beeswax industry, is how it's grown by about 20 billion rands. I mean, this is lucrative. But as he was mentioning, not all of the honey you're finding in your shelves at the supermarkets are actually raw honey. Some of it is adulterated, meaning there's a lot of sugary substances added to it. So just be careful in that regard. Anyway, it brings us now to just after 7:30. We're taking a short nasheed and an ad break. When we come back, Tech Talk Part 1, I speak to an inventor, Mangiso Mabaso, and we're chatting about a science lab that he's got, and it's an app called the Sisanda app. We'll be back in a few. Stay tuned.